So the next part is part 2, and this is the secrets of record-breaking fitness. I think in this chapter he was also going on about, or was it in the previous part where he was going on about like how he broke all the records or the world-breaking records? I can't actually remember, to be honest.
He broke all the records for what? That's the only bit I can't.
As in like climbing. That was the previous one, wasn't it? And then like doing a marathon, pulling a car.
Oh yeah, sorry, we were. Yeah, so the climbing was the Mount Everest on the rope.
Okay, yeah.
And the pulling the car, he did like a marathon, and then he did like an ultra marathon or something similar to that.
Yeah.
A triathlon with a tree attached to his back.
A triathlon.
And when we say tree, tree. That's what he called it, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So in this one, so the first chapter is how to lose fat, and once again, he's got another pyramid, with the base layer being flavor. The second layer being fuel, the third being function, the fourth being fitness, and the top being fun. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a bit skeptical about his kind of nutrition ideas, just because he's essentially not a nutritionist. There are basics, and obviously that you need to kind of present them, but yeah, I take a lot of this kind of stuff with a pinch of salt to a degree. But yeah,
although
anyway,
I want to add that the fact that you put flavor at the bottom is quite interesting.
Yeah, I thought that as well.
That being the base I think is interesting, because obviously he's realized that stuff being tasty is probably one of the most important factors for you to like continue eating the same thing. Yeah. And therefore, if you can make healthy things tasty, you're more likely obviously to continue on a healthy diet, let's just say.
Exactly.
Which I not many people talk about flavor, I didn't think, over, do they? They kind of start with you just need to eat healthy. It's like, well, okay, it's easier said than done, right? Like everybody knows they have to eat healthy, but nobody does it. And there's a reason for that. And that's because healthy food in general tends to not taste as great, I guess, in the sense of sugary things taste good. They make you feel good. Whereas healthy things don't seem to have the same effect, right? So this is, one of the things that we need to change to make sure that you can almost become addicted to eating more healthy.
No, this is true. And I think I don't think I put the note here, but I think he was saying that the most effective diets are the ones that you can stick to. And I think that kind of like lesson can be applied to so many things. The best training plan is one that you can stick to. When we talk about health, a lot of it is basically just consistency, just as we talk about habits. And the easiest things are the ones that are you can easily stick to. And flavor, I think, in this case is that.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one thing there, which I was just thinking off the cuff. In a weird way, the word diet to me almost implies as a finish line. You know, when you say I'm going on a diet, so there's like an end date to where the diet finishes. And like the whole point of this is like you're changing your lifestyle, right? Like it's not, if you want something to, if you want to get results continuously or be healthy for the rest of your life, you probably have to eat healthier for your life, and therefore the lifestyle has to change, right? Like I was only just thinking about that then. I was like, diet. There is like this. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's always like a finish line to a diet. Somebody's like, "Oh, I'm on a diet at the moment." It's like, okay, so you're not on a diet always. And what does that mean? That means you can eat healthy for a tiny bit of time, then you're going to not eat healthy again. Yeah, and then you're just going to reverse the progress you've made, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like it needs to be like a reframe of, and that's why I guess the flavor comes in, because it's like, I'm not just going to make you go on a diet. You're going to start eating tastier, but you're going to eat healthier food that now tastes like the stuff that isn't healthy, or something like that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think our association probably comes from it always being linked to like losing fat, right? Like whenever I've heard someone say, "Oh, I'm going on a diet," it's normally because they want to, lose fat.
And also because it's not exactly a pleasurable experience, because most people, when they go on a diet, either restrict their calories or they eat stuff they don't like. Yeah. Like that's why it's hard. And that's why they're like, "Oh, I'm only on this diet for this amount of time," right?
Yeah.
It's,
and so and they're kind of like short-term goals to a degree. It's like, "Oh, I just want to lose 5 kilos, or I just want to, I want to put on this weight. I'm going to bulk this season. I'm doing this. This is my diet." And so they're all, because they're short-term goals. It means, like you said, I can see the association with there being like a deadline.
I wonder if the actual the word diet
definition.
on a little. Okay. Yeah, special course of food to which a person restricts themselves either to lose weight or for medical reasons. But like a special course of food doesn't it's not like continuous. It doesn't strike me as saying like a continuous lifestyle change you've made to eat better or less food.
Yeah.
But then so for example, if you're eating a vegetarian diet, that specifically says the kind of food that a person or animal or community habitually eats. So technically, I think what's actually happened is we've like conflated the two meanings. Originally, your diet was going to be what you eat in totality.
Yeah.
But now we say I'm going on a diet, you're almost like in my head,
you're going to come off it at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's being communicated, or like I'm on a diet at the moment. Like that almost is like defeatist in when you say it, right? It's like, I'm only on it for this short period of time. Whereas if you just go, I'm on a diet. Like I'm eating a different diet. You could, that is a bit more like conclusive. Like I'm definitely going to stick to it, kind of thing. It probably still isn't, but that's only because I've heard so many people say like I'm on a diet now, or I'm on a diet for the moment. But yeah,
no, it's an interesting point. Yeah. And then, so then moving on to the second platform, and this is food fuel. So he talks about the calorie and what it is. So it was in 1825 when the calorie as we know it was invented by Professor Nicolas Clément Disson. Did I pronounce that right, Jess?
Oui.
Oui. Who proposed a theory by which steam engines converted heat into energy for work. To validate his theory, he needed a unit of heat. And so he created this metric. And so calorie can be defined as 1 calorie is the amount of heat needed to elevate by 1 degree centigrade 1 kilo of water, which I've always found it hard to get my head around. So
how it links to the food content, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do they do? Just put it on fire and see how it heats up the water? It's
just energy being converted to heat to be able to raise the degree of 1 kilo of water by one degree. Is that it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm the same as you. I never completely got exactly how they've jumped the gun from that to food. I would love to know the original experiment and see it, if that makes sense. Because obviously he's talked about it here. Is it the case of like burning food to then heat it up?
Yeah. So I don't know whether it's just a method of being able to explain or being able to like almost extrapolate onto food intake, right? So this just literally says that it can raise water, like a kilo of water by 1 degree, and the energy required to create that heat. And so I feel like energy being used for anything, but it's just being used to explain heat increase, and then that's used to describe food and how much food is required.
What is used to describe the potential of how much energy it can release, right? That's, I guess, the point of it. But once again, the irony of all of this is like, fine, let's just say we're going to take it as gospel because that's what everybody does. But if it is wrong, that means we're categorically wrong across the board. Every single food, it's one of these things. If this doesn't actually translate directly to the actual food content, we would basically just put a number to something which doesn't mean anything. But I assume because obviously they cross-compared like the calorie content of carbohydrates to fat and stuff like that, right? I think fat has more calories, obviously, like I think it's 8 per fat gram, isn't it? I can't remember exactly what it is, but I wonder also if they've done that based upon like chemistry instead, right? Because obviously they've worked out that a carbohydrate is a certain long chain of carbons, then obviously fat's like a elongated carbohydrate essentially, I think, with some fatty acids attached to it or whatever. I wonder if they've done it almost then from the process of just like working out the atomic numbers or whatever associated with these like molecules, and then done it that way, if that makes sense, with the protein that's the same.
I don't know, but I would assume that like realistically the reason why it's still upheld is because everyone holds the same metric. Otherwise it wouldn't make any sense, right? If people just had different metrics to explain how much energy is being produced or when we take in food. So how do we use calories? When you eat food, you are eating the energy, which is calories, stored within it. Your body is capable of doing 3 things with the energy you've just chowed down on. You burn it, you store it, or you absorb it. And so a calorie surplus, self-explanatory, but if you eat more calories, then you burn, you store fat. And a deficit is if you burn more calories than you eat, you lose fat.
So I can't wait to get into the book of why we get fat.
Yeah.
That is kind of true, but it's also oversimplified. There's hormones involved as well, but if anybody's interested in that, keep listening to the podcast because we'll be touching, I think, that book in a couple of weeks or so, something like that. But that would explain that better, because the calories in, calories out is kind of a, not debunked, but like it's an oversimplistic way of looking at how your body actually uses its energy or uses food, for energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to reading that book, actually. I think it'll be good. So a few more details on a calorie deficit. So essentially what you want to do to succeed in a calorie deficit, if you want to lose weight, that is, you need to pick a number and stick to it. So the optimal size of a calorie deficit for weight loss can vary based on individuals' maintenance calorie number. So for instance, a 25% reduction in food intake might be too aggressive for someone who maintains their weight at 2,000 calories per day, right? Because 25% would be 500 calories. That's quite a lot. While someone who maintains their weight at 4,000 calories a day per day, 25% decrease isn't as much. You're still left with 3,000 calories. Or there's another option, and I think this is a better one, where you pick a number based on a percentage. So if you take your maintenance calorie number and subtract 20%, it is better estimate, because it's just a bit more relative, essentially. And then there's he gives a third option here. So picking a number based on a goal, weight, and time frame. And I thought this was just quite interesting, just because I wonder whether people really think about the goal of losing fat over a certain, like applying it to a certain time frame. So for instance, 1 pound of fat is 3,500 kilocalories. So if we provide an example, so basically if you want to lose 9.5 kilos, which is 21 pounds, like I never work in pounds, but that equates to 21 pounds times 3,500 calories, because like we said, 1 pound of fat is 3,500 kilocalories, sorry. And so that would be 73,500 kilocalories. Now, let's say you're getting married or you're going on holiday in 14 weeks, which is 98 days. Then this gives you a required deadline. So we simply just divide that number, so 73,500 kilocalories by 98 to give us 750 kilocalories per day that we need to cut. Now, like you just said, this is very simplistic. So,
but it's a good guideline.
There's probably so many. It's a guideline,
roughly right. Like it's something to aim for, right? There's some value in having a structured goal. Let's just say, rather than. At least kind of know where you stand. You need to be at least hitting that 750 kilocalorie deficit or whatever it was. But yeah, it is more nuanced than that. I quite like I know we've both been listening to it, like the Andy Galpin approach to like basically fat loss is just breathing. He's like, just make sure you breathe more. I thought it was quite funny. It's quite simplistic. But yeah,
it is interesting. Like I do think these are. I've never been a big fan of just like the idea of just losing weight or like you want to be a certain weight, because it doesn't mean anything. It's so abstract, right? It's like, what does it mean to be 65 kilos? What does it mean to lose 10 kilos, right? Like you've got this idea of in your head of what it looks like, maybe. And that's essentially what you're going for. And I feel like people get so hung up on, especially like adults, of this idea of like losing weight and that being the measure that they should focus on, rather than like if they're feeling better or if they've got, if they're looking better.
You could even say something along the lines of like their weight might not even decrease if they're doing weight training, because they might be losing fat and putting on muscle, and therefore muscle mass weighs more than fat, and therefore they might even put on weight. But then if you look better, it's like, okay, and like you said, if you've got more energy, you're right, there is a very much like, it's a classic thing with numbers, isn't it? Like you see a number and you obsess over it too much. You forget about all the other factors that one might contribute to the number, but also what's important, right? Like most people want to lose weight because they want to look better as well. So maybe you haven't lost weight. Maybe you do look better because you've put on muscle mass. I don't know. It's
And I just couldn't imagine using this kind of goal, just because I would stress out over, like, for instance, if a day I didn't lose 750, drop it by 750 kilocalories, So then what? The next day I like double that. I just starve.
I have to say, that's how I treat my my gym and stuff as well. Like I used to fret over like, the protein intake, because you just meant to have like a specific amount times your kg amount or something like that. And I've decided to stop caring about it and just make sure I like listen to my body and just make sure I eat more protein than not, right? Because I've realized you can get into this like whole cycle where you actually get more upset with yourself and not for like not eating the things you're meant to, right? And the whole point of like being on this is like as a lifestyle change and not a diet, you need to make it sustainable. And if you're like depressed every day because you're not hitting your targets, it's not going to be very conducive to continuing, right? Like what happens when people get sad? They usually try and compensate with other behaviors, such as, maybe snacking on sweets or whatever. I don't know how people do it. You're setting yourself up for failure, basically. So you kind of need a more balanced approach, I guess. Like you should have these numbers in your mind, but realize, if you miss it one day, it's not the end of the world, right? Like it's
exactly. And also, what are you doing it for, right? Like once again, it's got to be part of a goal. And most people aren't going to give a shit. Like, okay, you might hold yourself to a certain standard, but most people aren't going to care. The only time you really would like desperately need something like this is if you're part of a sporting event that categorizes people based on weight, right? Otherwise, you've got all the time in the world, and yes, you should focus on it. You should try and cut down on fat or, build muscle, whatever, but you've got a lot more time. You don't need to put it within this time frame that adds stress and actually makes it more difficult to try and achieve. Like to be honest, I've never liked this idea of like trying to get a summer bod. Like I understand the concept of like bulking essentially. But it just seems like there's no purpose to it. There's no longevity.
Well, there is, I guess. The purpose is to have a summer bod, right, for summer when they have the tops off.
But again, ironically, it's like
the diet thing, isn't it? No, it's funny you say that, because actually is usually the motive is to be on a beach sipping the stuff which makes you fat. It gets to the point where you end up putting all the calories back on because you're binging on a holiday. But that besides the point. I guess the other thing, once again, with a summer bod is like, it's the classic thing with a diet. It's only for the summer. It's like, I'm only gonna have this bod for the summer, and then I'm gonna get like, instead of just being like, let's just get in good shape. Just leave it at that. Let's just be in good shape or there or thereabouts all year round. Like, how about that as a goal? It's funny because you never hear anybody say that, did they? They're not like, I'm just gonna get in good shape and can maintain it. It's just like, and I've never crazy as that as a goal, but that is technically the goal you want if you want to look good. You need to you need to look good first of all, and then you need to maintain it. So therefore, it's just I don't know.
Like I get people want to get bigger, and I understand that, but once again, it like kind of emphasizes this point that people don't think of their body as in like functional. Like I want to build my body for a function, right? Like what do I actually use my body for? Because most people aren't going to compete by like, being
a function of attractiveness, a function of, like realistically, they're trying to buy social reward in the sense of like feeling good because people pay them compliments or something like that. Most of the time, not all.
Yeah.
Increasing increasing self-confidence. It's like a function of your confidence almost, right? Like it's less than like a goal based on like sport, or unless of course you're an athlete, and then it is based upon
but then that makes sense. Of course. But anyway, bit of a tangent, but getting back to what was it, food, so calories. So he had a few last points on this point. So fast versus slow fat loss. So naturally, larger calorie deficits will produce the highest rates of fat loss. However, interestingly, if people cut too many calories, it can reduce their metabolism and downregulate their fat-burning hormones, meaning it becomes completely counterproductive. And I think this is kind of touching on what you were talking about with this new fat book. The idea that there are more kind of mechanisms in play, and it's not as simple as like you just cut food, you lose fat, because there are so many other processes other than just fat storage that your body requires calories for.
There's been experiments on mice, for example, right, where they have exactly the same diet, and because they have a certain hormone going, they get like double as fat. It's just like, okay, well, in that case, it's not a calories in, calories out, because if it was, they would all put on the same amount of weight. And for example, there's a certain like gene that like basically creates these like lipid receptors to basically pull in the free flowing glucose in the bloodstream into the fat cells, and basically can go on overdrive. And that's when the fat just keeps building itself up and people get hungrier and hungrier. But like, even if you eat no calories, you get fat with that. And it's just crazy. Like, you know, I used to think, you know, that whole, I don't know if we spoke about it before, but just like obesity kind of isn't genetic. You know, you've chosen to eat too much, right? But it's really, really not like that. There is people out there who can eat very little and get very fat very quickly. And it's kind of opened my eyes to that. But anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. I just
it is interesting
seeing this book now a little bit, just being like, okay, I thought he was obviously a very smart dude, knows what he's talking about. But then also at the same time, he's not gone into the details too much, because if he did, he would have read some of this other stuff. But
but it is interesting, and I think like weight, you know, people don't think of it as heritable, right? As in like it can be inherited, but actually it's got a strong heritability score. I think it's like 0.7, which means that, like, you know, of the variability in the population, 70% of it is explained by genetics, which is quite a lot, right? So, you
doesn't surprise me,
but yeah, so it's just interesting to hold on to that, because it's, once again, like, we fall into this kind of attitude in society that we blame ourselves because we can't do something, but actually, you know, we have to consider what we can control to a degree. Long-term fat loss. So smaller calorie deficits are generally easier to sustain, as they are less severe on the body, help manage appetite and hunger better, and do not require as much exercise or food restriction. In contrast, large calorie deficits can be more challenging to adhere to, as they demand more exercise and or food restriction, making them hard to achieve. And this kind of, once again, goes back to what you were talking about with, you know, the flavor aspect of it. It's something that you can stick to. Same thing with this. It's like, you know, a smaller deficit is something that is more easily obtained. And so it just means that it's got a higher likelihood of actually being achieved.
More easily to be sustained.
Absolutely. And then sports performance and fat loss. So large deficits make it harder to train and recover from workouts, because naturally you need, you know, a bit of energy to be able to actually perform. And then last point, so lean muscle mass. So a larger calorie deficit can lead to more muscle loss, particularly if strength training and protein intake are insufficient. If someone is already relatively lean, a larger calorie deficit may result in muscle loss, even with strength training and adequate protein intake, which is quite self-explanatory, I would say.
And so then we're going to move on to sort of the food function stage, which I believe is sort of breaking down more of what these sort of macronutrients are. So here you've got the bit which I was saying earlier, and I got it wrong because I said 8 calories, but it's 9. So fat contains 9 calories per gram. I know, shocking. And carbohydrates and protein contain 4. And fats are known as medium chain triglycerides, found in products such as coconut oil, which stimulate thermogenesis. And I don't really get this bit about thermogenesis, like, you know, the burning of energy, but like, doesn't all food cause burning of energy, you know, if that makes sense? Like, he's kind of making out as if fat does something different. But it
is it thermogenesis if it's just burning fat, or is it? I know it says energy.
I don't know, because obviously, what is the point of ketosis? I'd have to look into that, to be honest. I don't feel comfortable commenting. I don't really know exactly how that works. All I know is from listening to that Andy Galpin like podcast is fat is broken down into the carbohydrates anyway. You know, like a fat is essentially just a massively long chain of carbohydrates.
Interesting.
And then obviously it sort of goes into the sort of macronutrients and their roles. So you've got protein, which is, you know, the sort of structure of muscles, or it's more like, it's easy to think of as the structure based macronutrient. I think Andy Galpin talks a lot about that, how that's the best way to think about it. And he's saying here, for sort of people who are looking to gain weight, 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram. That's a lot. Like, when I look at that, that is a lot. Like, what do I weigh at the moment? 80, roughly a bit over 80 kg. So that's, oh my God, what even is that? That's like 150 grams of protein, if not more. Well, that's a lot of protein. Like, the more I think about it, like, I try and get at least like an animal in a day, you know. An animal source. Like, for example, 2 chicken breasts, right? My understanding is about 30 grams of protein each, maybe.
You know, you've got to pump those numbers up, baby.
So honestly, when I think about it, it's just, I'm missing the mark by a mile. But that's a lot of protein. Like, that's
I know
it's chicken breast. That's about like 6 chicken breasts a day.
Yeah.
But I think here he is actually talking about the upper sort of echelons of like, muscle growth. If you really want to push it, if you really want to pump it up, as you said, you got to get your 1.7 grams in.
Yeah. I found it interesting that endurance athletes require more.
Do they? Okay. That's probably repairing, I guess, damage caused by the impact, I guess, in my head.
I guess also maybe you're doing it for a longer time.
Yeah.
But still, it's like
causing mini micro tears or something like that. Like at the end of the day, of course, it's probably causing some form of damage, right?
Yeah.
But that's interesting in itself, yeah. Sorry, and then when you move on for protein, you've got the carbohydrates, which are broken down to glucose.
Mm-hmm.
These carbohydrates are stored in the liver, brain, and muscles, and are probably obtained from fruits and vegetables. I thought it's quite interesting to think as well about. I don't know if this is 100% true. It might be, but sugar is obviously like a more concentrated version, or more concentrated carbohydrate. Like it's like a dose of sugar has more easily available carbohydrates, like they're already broken down and easily accessible in the form of glucose, whereas stuff like potatoes have starch, which is like a longer chain of carbohydrates and take longer to break down. And I just thought it was quite interesting how your body obviously, the essential taste or the pleasure you feel is because it's an easy accessible energy source. Like if you really think about what it really is, it's like a highly concentrated, easy accessible energy source. And that's why your body obviously looks at it and goes, wow, that's amazing. Like this is so easy to, like, we don't even have to metabolize this. It's like the cheapest energy possible in a weird way.
Absolutely.
It doesn't involve any breaking down, right? But obviously it's become so, like in the past, it was rare to find, it was rare to find sources of food with this. So obviously we had to settle for sort of like the high fibrous vegetables with small amounts of, carbohydrates in comparison to obviously what you get now, like the processed, refined, hyper concentrated, sugary, chocolates, milkshakes or whatever. But I thought it was interesting. I was thinking about it the other day about how literally sugar is just like a highly concentrated, already broken up, ready to be digested source of carbohydrates.
And that's like, part of the issue is that it doesn't have this additional kind of fiber, this additional like nutrients that you normally would require it
slows down the processing of it, right? Because obviously when you eat something, it goes into your bloodstream. Like these nutrients go into your bloodstream to be sent off to your muscles, to be sent off to your liver, like we were just saying. But like in the past, like you were just saying, if it was starch based or something longer where it required time to be broken down to then be put into the bloodstream, the spike of the amount of like glucose in your blood would have been less, or would have lasted for longer and over time, right? And that's the whole point of this, like blood glucose sort of spiking and stuff like that. And if you think about it, your body wasn't meant to have this much glucose, and that's why it gets almost like a toxic effect if you have too much of it just in your system at once.
I wonder, random tangent, but I wonder if fruits and vegetables that have that are more like take longer to digest grow quicker. I'm just thinking, like, because it used to be a luxury if you came across some kind of fruit with a high level of sugar content. I was just wondering whether it might be that the opposite grows quicker and so it's more accessible, whereas fruits aren't as much. I don't know. Really random thought, but yeah.
So just say again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
So as in like whether fruits, those things that are high in sugar content, take longer to grow compared to other things that have a lower sugar content.
That'll be interesting to see.
Because I'm thinking like potatoes are supposed to be quite easy to grow, are they not? And like they're pretty. You get them quite often. Maybe. I don't know. It's such a random.
I don't know, but that'll be interesting.
A relevant thought, but yeah.
No, my understanding was as well that stuff like bananas, as they ripen, they get more sugary because the starch they had in it breaks down over time.
Yeah.
So like as you leave it to sort of ripen, the riper it gets, the less fibers. For example, if you eat like a really aged banana, it's kind of like really really mushy. Whereas if you eat it originally, it's almost quite chewy. Yeah. It's to do with the fiber content. So if you want a more sugary fruit, you let it ripen.
Yeah. Interesting. Didn't know that.
There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find this carbohydrate stuff quite fascinating, to be honest, and this whole like carbon cycle of life with the Andrew Galpin's like way of describing it. I thought it's like, it kind of put pieces together loads of different things with not just food, but like the atmosphere, right? The fact that we breathe in oxygen and give off CO2, and the plants take in CO2 and turn carbohydrates from the CO2, and then we eat carbohydrates. It's like massive how the carbon cycle of life works. It
is so interesting. There is one. I think people should go and listen to, I can't remember which one it is, but one of the 6 episodes that they did. But we're taught about it, right? We're taught about it at school, but I don't think we're taught about it how it really like, all we're taught is that we breathe out carbon dioxide and plants.
They don't really make a big like grand narrative explaining it all, right? And how that even links to the food we eat, right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, I found an even better one than just his talk with Andrew Huberman. He does one called The Physiology of Fat Loss on his on his channel. It's like an hour long, I think. It's like 55 minutes for physiology, where he properly like spends the whole time just talking about this idea. Because obviously on the Andrew Huberman, it was kind of like maybe like a 20-minute segue or the beginning of the talk. But if people are interested in sort of the cycle of how, food is made obviously by plants, and then obviously we eat it, and then we expel carbon dioxide, and obviously need oxygen to get rid of carbons within our body, because that's the waste product of burning food. And then how obviously when we breathe CO2, it then goes into the atmosphere, which then trees take in, and then repeat the cycle again, turn it into carbohydrates, and then we eat it. It's just, it's stuff you kind of touched on at school, but you never got explained in a way that actually makes it intuitive, I guess you could say. And it definitely made me way more interested in it than I had been at school, just from hearing about it. And it's obviously helped with the sort of like what you were saying a minute ago with like the sugar and stuff. Just like you're just coming up with ideas. Then you're like, oh, if this is the case, then maybe fruits take longer to develop. So also, by the way, you're on mute. Just I think it's the headphones.
No, I was changing my light because it went off. But no, exactly. It's a good framework to be able to apply to a lot of, just anything that's living, isn't it? Essentially.
Because you're right, because we all use the similar sort of digestive processes and stuff. It's like, DNA is coded for this like way of using energy resources, right? So
exactly. So then onto this next part. So carb loading. I've heard this term quite a bit, but I've never actually looked into it. So essentially I think it's just taking in a lot of carbohydrates to kind of put on weight. So how much? Carbohydrate intake ranges from 5 to 7 grams per kilo of body weight per day for general training needs, and 7 to 10 grams for increased needs of endurance athletes. So if you're 7 to 10 grams per kilogram. And what are you?
I am about 82 kilograms.
82. So okay.
What's that? I can't even do the maths in my head. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, more than that.
Yeah, I think this is just before though. So wait, so how does it work? The average athlete can typically only store sufficient muscle glycogen, which is the stored form of carbohydrates in muscles, to sustain 90 minutes of exercise. Beyond this point, the glycogen levels start to deplete, causing a decline in energy levels and eventually leading to fatigue. I think carb loading refers to it must be the additional, right? You're eating 820 kilos more. That's a lot.
In my head, it was more about making sure your glycogen stores were fully loaded up, right? Because my understanding as well is once you get past your glycogen, once you finish your glycogen stores, right, they can't be stored anywhere else. So therefore, it either goes to the liver, or it goes somewhere else where it can be stored, or it gets turned into fat. But for me, the idea of carb loading, right, is just to make sure that let's just say you've done some heavy training sessions before a competition, you're just doubly making sure that you've got your glycogen stores topped up, right? Before you don't want to go into a competition where you're not fully fueled, so to speak, in the muscle, like the area you're going to use, right?
Exactly. And you could do it a couple of days. It says several days of eating before. So that makes sense.
I also heard a ridiculous stat. I think it was on the Andrew Galpin thing on the fat loss, where it's something like the average male or the average female, anybody who has a 20% body fat, can literally live off that fat for 50 days. Like that's how much energy.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
that's
surprised.
how much energy is in that fat. And I was like, that is crazy to think that you can just survive with that for like 50 days. And obviously you died before of like, probably starvation. I feel like you wouldn't, obviously, I don't know, you can survive.
Well, no, actually, like, because
it's
like
more like water. You need
no,
water,
so you need water. You need water. Like, I think you die after 3 days or something, but you can go 3 months without food. Like my dad's done 41-day fast, which it's just obscene. Like I just
that's
don't know.
criminally long, to be fair.
Yeah, that is.
And that's just a water fast, right? That's like
just a water fast. I mean, like I think more than anything, that would just. I mean, psychologically, that would probably.
I'd get so depressed that all the
discipline.
muscles that would disappear. Because you would lose a lot of muscle mass that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, we've never been in a situation where we've had a high fat percentage.
No,
right? So
I would love to try like a day or 2 day fast. I've always been saying to myself I need to get around to doing it, but I've just never acted on it.
I want to get into the habit of doing like a 4 to 5 day fast, like every, I don't know, 3 to 6 months. I think would be
like a 6 month reset or something.
Yeah.
I quite like the idea.
I want to actually read a lot around fasting. I want to understand the actual.
Maybe we can actually add that to this fitness and nutrition stuff. Like it fits in, and for me, I kind of want to add like variation into obviously this overarching topic of fitness. Because if you end up reading similar books to this book again and again, people are going to get bored of the same stuff, aren't they? So,
yeah, exactly.
Yes. Anyway, should we move on to fat?
Yes, let's do it.
So our bodies need fat to assist in vitamin absorption and to aid hormone regulation and even aid optimal brain function. So healthy dietary fat should constitute 25 to 35% of calories. And obviously that makes it slightly easier because the calorie content is higher. So therefore, you're not actually having to eat that much fat. And to be honest, fat is pretty much everywhere really to some degree. In quite a lot of foods, there's always some form of fat. And then you got a bit of note here about the ketogenic diet. So the keto diet aims to achieve ketosis by being low in carbohydrates but high in fat. In this state, the body produces ketones as an alternative fuel source when glucose is scarce. This is achieved by increasing fat intake as it forces the production of ketones to replace carbohydrates as a source of energy, which I thought was interesting. I would love to know more as well about the science of this because my understanding from the Galpin podcast and stuff was that there's always some form of fat flowing through your system. So like it's not like we're never burning fat. Like we're always burning some. But I guess in a state of ketosis, maybe you're just burning more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I
think that would probably make sense. And it also differs from like where you're getting that fat from, right? Like, so you can get it from your muscles, you can get it from your fat, and you can get it from your liver. And I think once it starts to, there are different ratios. So for instance, if you're engaging in like exercise, I think he was saying that there's, you're getting fat from all of those areas, but just at different percentages. And I think once it starts to like really take a lot from your liver, you start to feel sick, right? But I would assume that under like a ketosis diet, that it probably is maybe taking more from your fat storages.
I assume so. Yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't really go too much into the details in this book, does it? It kind of just like gives you all these topics, right? Which is kind of why we need and we will be going into a further podcast into like each of these individual parts. So like in terms of the why we get fat, etc. So and then obviously we can do what you're just saying about fasting as well, because that'd be interesting. And I think we should probably do one touching on the ketogenic diet as well.
I think that'd be interesting actually. Yeah.
And then you've got something here to do with the micronutrients. So micronutrients include vitamins, minerals, and enzymes, which play a key role in energy production since enzymes require nutrient cofactors like vitamins B, B1, B2, B3, and B5, and the minerals magnesium, iron, and sulfur, or they simply do not function. And that's quite interesting. I actually didn't know that was the purpose of vitamins. That's another topic we can jump into off the back.
It's just so interesting, isn't it? It's like you're told to take vitamins, but you don't know what they really contribute to.
But they're also hypotheses of what they contribute to, and as we'll find out when we go into the sort of recovery book, the studies are usually inconclusive, and she really puts a massive premium on the placebo effect. Well,
I think the placebo. I think it's like 80% in most studies anyway. Exactly. But you can. you can understand straight away where like anything could be like turned to a product, as in like any kind of chemical, like mineral or vitamin. In this case, like B1, B2, B3.
A pill of sugar.
Yeah, it could be anything, but like all that's needed, right, is one kind of scientific study to say there might be a relationship there.
Exactly.
And then someone will take that and be like, you need this every day, or then they create, a time frame or whatnot.
Of course.
Like say
yeah.
And then we start to assume that, we need to take vitamin B1 in the morning before we have food.
It's like our body wasn't, capable of living without it. It's just like, what do you mean? We've been living for like what? Like the human species has been going on forever. Like, it's
no, exactly. And that's why I've always been a bit like skeptical of vegan diets, because you can't really have a vegan diet without taking B12 supplements. You can get B12 from certain foods, but the fact is that those foods would never have been readily accessible back when you're a hunter-gatherer. And so like, I do agree that we eat too much meat, but like, I do think that, the opposite is not the solution. Sorry for anyone who's a vegan, but because we never just evolved to have, a little pill every morning.
Of course not.
Essentially.
Yes. Well, we're top. In fact, what we can do as well with this series, we can go into some of the vitamin stuff, so sort of like the promising stuff and why we take vitamins, and then we can also go into the other side, which is why vitamins don't matter. So we have the balance of both.
Yeah. I like that.
Doing that.
That's cool.
But I think we're moving now back into the fitness after the nutrition. So
fitness I think makes up, is it the third? The fourth level of the pyramid. So the training method doesn't matter, but consistently training does. So once again, it's the same thing with, the diet that we were talking about. So one form is high intensity interval training, or HIIT. I think most people are kind of familiar with this. But for those who aren't, so it typically involves a brief and intense burst of exercise, usually lasting from 20 to 90 seconds, followed by a period of low intensity exercise or complete rest that lasts from 20 to 120 seconds. This cycle is repeated for a total of 10 to 20 minutes using different types of exercise equipment, such as a bike, treadmill, or performing bodyweight exercises such as sprints up and down hill. It's been shown to be very effective at stoking up the body's metabolism, which naturally results in greater fat loss. And you can understand why, like even touching on what we were talking about with Andy Galpin and the whole idea of like losing fat is breathing, right? When you do HIIT, you're breathing a lot, right? It's intense, it's full on, and you're sweating. So you're burning, like literally you're burning fuel. And so you can understand why HIIT would probably be very good at trying to lose weight.
Yeah. And I think he's got here as well something to do with strength training as well. Did you touch on that? No, you didn't, did you?
No.
So after a strenuous 90-minute weightlifting session, the body's metabolic rate remains elevated for an extended period, and this can enhance the oxidation of lipids after exercise, meaning you are still burning calories after you finish training. And what I thought was quite interesting about this is he didn't touch on the fact that if you do strength training, you build more muscle mass, and if you have more muscle mass, you burn more calories every day because you have more cells requiring fuel, right?
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. Like, I think in one of the Andrew Galpins, he talks about that as well. Like, it's one of the things people don't look at is the fact that if you increase your muscle mass, you will have more energy demands every day, as long as you obviously keep physically active with that excess muscle mass or extra muscle mass.
Yeah, your extra muscle needs those nutrients, and it would explain why hunter-gatherers, you don't really find them absolutely jacked, right? Because they don't have all these calories at their disposal, and you wouldn't be able to sustain that level of muscle.
For sure. Yeah. I just still find it's quite interesting going back to the fact that we're still describing the same pyramid here. So like the pyramid of fat loss, and how fitness is like the second from the top, as in it's one of the least important parts of this. Like the fact that Flavour was down at the bottom, once again, just reiterates that a lot of this is based on diet and not fitness. Because so many people, I do think, in fact, me included in the past, just thought I can outwork a bad diet, but the truth is you can't. And to that, once we go into the sort of more into a more granular view of why people actually do get fat, you realize that actually it is the types of food you choose as well, which is even more important than even the diet. It's like as you'll find out, he even argues that you could eat excess calories as long as they're not high in sugar content. And you wouldn't gain fat. And I was like, that's crazy to think, like, if that's the case. But anyway, what do we got? The last bit, we got fun. And then the first
I don't know why it was
under
fun, but
the first bit we got here about fun is sleep. I do find sleep fun. So here is talking a lot about leptin. So leptin is a hormone that plays a crucial role in regulating your body weight by suppressing appetite and increasing energy expenditure. Sleep deprivation can lead to a decrease in leptin levels, resulting in an increase in appetite, specifically for high-calorie dense foods with high carbohydrate content, like chocolate, sweets, and general junk food. At the same time, sleep deprivation also leads to an increase in the hormone ghrelin, which is produced in the stomach and signals to the brain whether we're hungry or not. This creates a situation where leptin is telling the brain that you're full and satisfied, while ghrelin is telling the brain that you're hungry, leading to strong cravings, which I think is quite an interesting point, because I wonder if it makes you crave things that are like lighter and easier to digest, you know?
Well, I think it's just like
it's kind of sending all the time. Like mixed signals, right? It's like, I'm hungry, but I'm not. And therefore, if you're hungry and you're not, you can't eat big meals, like a big fat meal, but you can eat something that's easily accessible and sugary, like we said, because sugar is essentially like more easily accessible energy. Therefore, like that's the first thing that I guess comes to your head for it.
I really feel it in the evenings, because I try and finish food by like 8:30, so that I'm kind of like I've digested it all by the time that I'm going to sleep. But oh my god, I come around like 10:30, I just get the strongest sugar craving. I just want like biscuits or chocolate or something like that.
I feel you, mate. I find it's interesting though, if you wean yourself off a bit, like anything, if you don't have it for a while, I always find my sugar cravings go. But if I start, feeding the monster, so to speak, however you want to say it, like if I start having more and more consciously, like I remember when I used to have like a Diet Coke a day, and I used to get into that phase of just like craving it, but now like I've stopped it, and I don't even get the craving really. Apart from when I see one, I'm like,
I know that's the hardest.
It's the classic cue of the habit circle, isn't it? Of the habit cycle.
Exactly.
So then he goes on to how to write your own diet in 5 steps. So work out your basal metabolic rate. So this is the amount of calories you burn per day at rest. So then you multiply by your level of activity. So little to no exercise means multiply your BMR by 1.2. Light exercise a few times a week means multiplying it by 1.375. Moderate exercise 3 to 5 times a week. So that you multiply by 1.55. And then heavy exercise 6 to 7 times a week for those absolute legends, you multiply by 1.725.
I'd love to know where these numbers have come from, but
it's really that's a very good point. Very, like, once again, I think they give the illusion of accuracy, but you should be just taken as like a pinch of salt. Like this is the rough amount you'd be looking at. Exactly. Then it's set your calorie deficit surplus, find your food ratio. So this is the ratio of protein, fats, and carbohydrates. So high carb is 70% carbs, 10% fat, 20% protein. High fat is pretty much the inverse, so 70% fat, 23% protein, 7% carbohydrates. And balanced is 25% protein, 25% fat, and 50% carbohydrates. I think that's quite interesting that protein is never any higher than that, but I guess once again, that's a lot of meat.
And also your body can only take, once again, there's like a cap, right? Like your muscles will take on your
I've heard this, but at the same time, I remember Andrew Galpin was saying, like, you know how people say that you pee away your protein? Like that does happen, but he's like, you have to be at the very extreme end of protein consumption. Like he's talking like elite bodybuilders who are eating like 20 chicken breasts a day. You'd have to have that and like he said, because you'd smell it. This is like you get gross peas, your peas smell like protein. It's like gross.
Okay, so it's not like but is that cap based on like, surely there's an individual cap, right?
I guess it really,
you wouldn't be able to eat like 20 chicken breasts if you're not a bodybuilder, right? Because your body would never use
you're right. I guess there is a level of it that's dependent upon the amount of damage your body has taken. So how much protein your body requires, if that makes sense. So like you're saying, if you're somebody who's like sedative or somebody who's like not doing anything, like no exercise at all, you can imagine, you're right, their protein threshold for starting to pee it out would be lower, because you're right, there's no use for it. It's like it'll be used for cellular repair, right? But obviously repair is based upon doing nothing. Whereas obviously if you put your body through some metabolic stress of like exercising, then obviously you're going to have a greater need for it. I do wonder though, if there's like, can you ever, I mean, obviously you can eat too much, but like surely if you work out and then you just stuff yourself with so much protein that eventually you start peeing it out, that means you've hit the threshold for the amount your body needed to recover, you know?
Yeah.
I would love to know how it recovers as well. Like, because obviously people sort of say it takes a couple of days, but like how quick are these processes, you know? Depending, like, is the process dependent on the amount of protein? Like, let's just say you only eat 2 chicken breasts today, right? And you just worked out. So you've got 2 chicken breasts worth of recovery, but there's still like another 2 chicken breasts needed. So therefore, tomorrow's chicken breasts contribute towards.
That's going to be the new metric. It's just like how many chicken breasts. You know, you need to multiply it by 1.25 chicken breasts.
But you kind of get what I'm saying, right? Like,
absolutely.
There might be like a cap to it, and it kind of makes sense that there is like an actual objective cap, because there has to be a point where your body goes, it's now repaired and it's bigger, or it's now done the adaptation. But then I wonder, obviously, if it doesn't truly repair, and then you go to the gym again because you haven't eaten enough protein, what then happens? You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's also interesting that like, I guess like proteins, it's basically protein synthesis, isn't it? And I think it's worth pointing out, like you said just before, it's for cell damage. So not just muscles, but there's, you know, we use proteins for everything. It's literally what our genes are there for, you know, to be able to.
It's structure, like
it's amino acids which create
your body.
Yeah,
enzymes.
So I guess, you know, it would depend on what kind of exercise you're doing, such as like strength and hypertrophy. They differ because obviously you're tearing more muscles during hypertrophy and stuff, and same with endurance. But yeah, it would be interesting knowing like what that cap is based on, and how to know, because like we just saw with carb loading, right? There's a certain amount of carbohydrate or glycogen your muscles can hold. And I guarantee you there will be something in the future where you can like see how high your like glycogen levels
that's
are,
a good point,
protein levels are, right?
Because your body has nutrient-based demands, right? Like demands based upon like, oh, we've damaged the cell, therefore we have a certain demand for a certain amount of protein. Like there is a bounded amount it needs, right? In my head,
it makes sense, unless it does make sense, but that would make sense.
And then also, protein can be turned into carbohydrates if needed, but I don't believe the reverse can happen.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking.
The way around. So, yeah, it's weird.
And protein isn't really stored, is it? It's used, and then I guess
that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand how protein is stored. So, is it therefore better to immediately put as much protein as possible in after a weightlifting session? But then, obviously, if it can't use it immediately, is it just going to pee it out? Compared to, you know, is it better to give it like a slowly sustained amount of protein, like, you know, every couple of hours have a bit more protein, because that way it's slowly using it as it comes in? Because the logic of that would make sense, that would be the better approach in my head, the more sustained. And they obviously do say, well, like bodybuilders, they end up eating like 7 times a day, right? And I'm wondering if they figured it out quicker than most people do.
Maybe, like, you know, they need a lot of it. And it's interesting in that, like, you know, Good to Go book, that you know, there isn't like a time period that you need to get your protein or your carbohydrates in. It's kind of like all been fabricated a bit, unless you're like then go to work out straight after, right? But normally when you come to like working out the next day, your muscles have somewhat recovered. And I guess a lot of the time we're maybe not ever maxing out fully, right? On like, we probably still always have some like protein at our disposal that we can help like recover. But if we were to do that for a long period of time, then we would slowly dwindle that supply. But I don't know. We'll probably get into this on.
That's it. You're right. The body can't store protein. Yeah. So any extras used for energy are stored as fat. So I guess it will be broken down immediately into carbs or stored as fat. That's interesting. Because then it becomes a point of, is there a specific amount of protein your body can take at one time? Because otherwise, you're right, you could end up stuffing yourself with like a massive amount of protein and basically wasted it because you should have spaced it out over, you know, a few hours. It sounds really weird, but it's like, do you eat 2 chicken breasts for lunch, or do you have one now and one for dinner? You know?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think they showed that, didn't they? They in that book, Good to Go, they were saying that it actually, like, spacing it out throughout the day was a bit more beneficial than having it all in one go. But I don't think that it was conclusive, that evidence. But yeah, interesting.
I think maybe the effects are so negligible, right? It's because any sort of muscle-based progress is so small. It requires months and months and months of training, and you would only know how you to optimize it by literally following somebody for like 3 months and then cross-comparing based on and controlling everything else, which is just impossible. Like controlling everything they eat, controlling everything they do, controlling all the forms of stimulus their muscles get, and then it doesn't even play into the fact that some people's genetic factors change, how they develop muscles, etc. Right? Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy.
I think it's worth considering that, most people aren't like top experts or professional athletes, right? They're just average people who are working out or in doing some kind of like physical fitness, which means we're probably not pushing our body to the very extreme that we're talking about in terms of like, depleting all of our like, our resources. And even if you were to do it, maybe you were to consistently train, let's say you were training like twice a day, every day, you would get to a point where you would need to recover and your body wouldn't be able to. And so your body's forcing you to recover, which means that you take in more and be able to like resupply those kind of stores.
I'm convinced that's where the value of like the pain comes in. When you just like, I was saying to you the other day, like your body kind of just gives up on you a little bit. Like, after playing some football, my legs just feel like jelly the following day, right? And it's kind of my body's way of telling me, don't use these legs. Make sure you. And then I always wake up really hungry as well. It's like, eat, don't use these legs, right? Yeah. I still found it really interesting how in that Good to Go book, like they were talking a lot about this guy who spent his whole life like doing, objective data measures such as like blood tests and, looking at hormone levels for athletes. And he's like, there's still nothing that he's seen that is better than just trusting your body with what's needed. There's no like objective data measure like where you test your blood and go, oh right, this person's obviously hungry. It's like, well, this person could have told you they're hungry without needing the bloody blood test. There's a reason why you have these feelings and sensations is to guide your action, right? It's it's like we've forgotten the intelligence of our own body a little bit.
No, exactly.
I've come full circle to like taking this like more scientific data-driven approach to actually realizing sometimes the best approach is just to actually be natural and listen to what's going on, like feel your way through things.
I mean, like we genuinely need to just think about it. Like our body has been evolved. Our body is amazing, right? And we're so adaptable and it's been evolving for how many millions of years. And now suddenly, someone says, no, you need Gatorade to be able to like recover. And it's like, shut the fuck up. No, you don't. Like you really, if this is a paradigm that we fall into because someone's created it. And it's like, we don't know enough about our body at that point. So it's like, oh, it makes sense. Maybe we do need this. But no, we don't need vitamin B12 to live. We don't need, Gatorade or a nutrition bar to recover. Like, and I'm looking forward to doing Good to Go because I think that'll be a good book to touch on.
Sorry, we've gone on a massive tangent again.
Yes, let's get back.
All relevant to the book, I hope.
So, next stage. So, how to get big and strong. What you basically come here to listen to. There's another pyramid, and the bottom one is master lifts. The next is improve work capacity. Then it goes gain muscle size, then increase speed and power, and then the top one is power tips and tools. So training for strength. It's not what you lift, but how you lift. Although strength is defined as the muscle's ability to produce force, this level of force can vary greatly throughout a particular lift and range of motion, which I think is very key, and we'll touch on in a second. So there are 5 ways to become strong. One is you need to visualize the lift, really visualize how the movement is supposed to look and feel. This stuff like visualization pops up in so many different areas, but actually I would say that it's probably quite like a good one just because, so many people in different areas like always vouch for it. I remember there was the, what was it called? It was was it Michael Phelps? I think he does this like every day. He like visualizes potential like issues that could go wrong, and then how he would deal with them. And then like it happened in the Olympic gold and Olympic
maybe something to do with his goggles. Have I heard that?
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
His goggles came off or something like that. Like he's practiced so many times that his goggles have come off or something.
Yeah,
or
and he's visualized
so many times.
it. So yeah, it does make a difference. And then second, lift without ego. I think this is really important. It is essential to check your ego at the door. Remember, it's not what you lift, but how you lift. Use weights that are light enough to maintain control, but heavy enough to stimulate the body to perform the correct movement pattern. And number 3, always lift and never fail. Did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, if you're just learning to lift, you need to avoid failure in your sets. The more you struggle and strain to grind out a repetition, the more your technique breaks down. So lifting too heavy or to failure results in ingraining the incorrect movement. And to be honest, I could definitely take a leaf out of his book. Sometimes the ego thing leaks into that a little bit, where you come in and you want to lift as heavy as you can, and you end up practicing bad form essentially all the time because you're trying your best to hit the heights that you once could do or you want to do. And we've been speaking about this a lot off the podcast about finding correct form for exercises. And to be honest, I have myself put down the weight a lot recently, and I was saying to Tristan as well that it's funny that some of the biggest or the best physiques or bodies or whatever you want to call it I see in the gym tend to actually be lifting a lot lighter than everybody else. And I think it's because of this. It's they're making sure they're actually doing the exercises properly, and hitting the right muscle groups, etc. I think that's one of the most important ones, to be honest.
100%. This idea of like mapping, like neurologically mapping the movement, right? Your brain needs to understand what movement it's doing, and if you can ace that movement early on, then you're able to then build add weight. Right. And you don't have to focus on it so much later on because it's so ingrained, so deeply embedded. But if you have to keep going back because I put the weight up and then it hurt me, or like I got injured, or I'm not feeling it, then it's like you have to keep going back down. And whereas if you spend the time to actually, embed that movement, then you're so much better off. I've kind of started to do it with most of my lifts now, just dropping the weight and really like focusing on the movement. Okay, so then number 4, so don't dilute your strength. So if you dilute your training by training multiple components of fitness at equal amounts, such as like training strength or speed or stamina all at the same time, you'll achieve less than optimal results and in turn dilute your strength. Essentially, your body doesn't know whether to become stronger or more enduring, since the potency of your training a specific component is lost. And that goes back to that law of specificity, right? If you want to get better at strength, focus on strength. Don't also do stamina and endurance and power and all these other things, unless you know that they are kind of like conducive. They have been shown to like aid, and some of them do. But
And then number 5 is get tight to get strong. So get tight, rigid, and strong when you squat, bench, and deadlift. Treat these exercises as full body exercise and embrace tightness. So what he means by this, I assume, is the sort of shoring up your core, right? Tensing your abs.
Everything,
Why? Because of Sherrington's law of irradiation, which states that when you contract one muscle hard, the muscles around it are connected to it and contract as hard as well. Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. I've never heard of that, but it actually makes a lot of sense. When you're doing these full functional body movements, these full compound exercises, you want to be engaging everything. And it's like, for instance, I was doing a military press today, and it's like, it makes so much more sense. And it really helps you with all your movements when you actually are really tight around everywhere, because you're more stable, essentially. So moving on. So how to start training. So 4 simple objectives your first strength training should serve to achieve. Number 1 is make strength training a habit. So there needs to be a level of consistency. Number 2, increase work capacity so you're able to train and positively recover from workouts. Number 3, build kinesthetic and muscular awareness and to know your body. So what we were talking about in terms of mapping those movements, building on that physiological intuition, really understanding how your body should move. And this is I would say this to anyone starting out at the gym. It's like, just go back home, go onto YouTube and understand how your body works and moves. I see like especially at my gym, I've got like, there are loads of like 15-year-old kids and they have no idea what they're doing. And I would literally say to them, like, invest in understanding how the body works, and then you will understand the movements that you should be doing, and then that physiological intuition will follow, and then you can kind of start to map those movements. And yeah, so number 4, become proficient with the movements. Do you want to?
The next one. So you've got the 3 forms of strength. So you've got absolute strength. So this is the greatest force that can be produced by a given muscle under involuntary stimulation. Then you've got competitive strength. So the ability of the muscles to produce the greatest force possible through a voluntary contraction. Then you've got training strength. This is the weight that you can lift for 1 repetition, but without substantial emotional excitement, like your competitive strength, which I thought was quite interesting. So there's a differentiation between the 2. I guess obviously if you're pumped up for an event, you're going to be able to perform slightly better than maybe your training strength. But and then he's got this next bit about the power to weight ratio. So the difference between absolute and competitive strength is known as your strength deficit. If there's a small difference between them, it shows you're using the muscle mass you have to its full neurological potential. Basically, all your muscle fibers are being used and firing. So if you're 80 kg but squatting 200 kg, you've got a good power to weight ratio. If you're 100 kg and squatting 150 kg, you've got a bad power to weight ratio, which I think is quite an interesting point. I used to actually get quite interested with this in terms of like the body weight to what you're actually able to like lift. It's quite an interesting statistic. So like I actually heard somebody try and tell me the other day as well about, I can't remember who it was, but there's like specific ratios you should have for your deadlift
muscle groups.
But for your deadlift, vs bench, vs squat. So like if you bench a certain amount, you should have a certain amount on your squat. Like if you're like all rounded, so like if you have like an all rounded physique, whereas I was severely lacking in my squat in comparison to my bench, to the point where I can almost do the same bench that I can do a squat. Which is like, and you're meant to do like multiples of your bench for a squat, right? Which just shows that I've obviously chosen to train chest a lot more than legs. And then I
don't think you're the only one in that.
Like, and there's deadlift as well, which was meant to be in between. So you're meant to be like, I think bench at the bottom, deadlift in between, and squat was meant to be the highest, I think. But I could be wrong. It could be deadlift actually the highest. Maybe I got like wrong. But it's interesting to consider as well when you're doing your weightlifting, like, where are you at in comparison to your weight? Like, is the weight you're lifting heavy for what you weigh? Because if you are like at a different level. So like I remember seeing before as well, like beginner, intermediate, advanced levels, based upon what you can do based upon your body weight. So like if you're, let's make it easy, 50 kg and you can bench 100 kg, you're absolutely smashing it because you've got double your body weight. Whereas somebody who's like 50 kg and only benching 50 kg, in fact, saying that's still strong, because lifting your body weight is usually seen as like, a top, or like not a top, but like an intermediate lifter if you can lift your body weight. But I just thought it was
And I think, like, we'll touch on this in a sec, but this idea that, your muscles, think of it as having like a potential limit of strength, right? And then once you like actualize that potential, then you have to and put on more muscle to be able to grow strength. But that's why sometimes you can see like really like kind of lean people who are fucking strong, and sometimes people who are really big who aren't that strong. Like, funnily enough, although bodybuilders will be strong, especially in comparison to an average Joe, they're probably not maxing out on the strength that their muscles can provide. Because then you see some like strength trainers and they're not as big, but they are like fucking strong as hell.
But like let's say like sort of gymnasts as well, like for their strength compared to their body weight, because they won't be weighing anywhere near what the bodybuilders will be, but their strength would be just as almost as strong as a bodybuilder, I would assume, in most things. So the next part, am I missing this bit when you establish a strength deficit? Do you want me to read that because you just highlighted it in green?
No, sorry. This was just.
You just read that. Sorry.
It was just a thought that I had at the time. So when you establish your strength deficit, you'll be able to design your training program and decide whether you need to get big, strong, or both. But I thought it was interesting because I was like, well, how much of a difference between your weight, and so exactly what we were talking about with the different lifts, how much of a difference is good? Who's deciding that it's good? And then do people differ based on how much their muscles are capable of, right? And whether there's like an individual difference. Like, do some people's muscles have like a ridiculous potential compared to others? And I would like, I just thought that would be interesting. I think it's called contractibility, something like that. Andy Galpin said, the like ability of a muscle, like how much strength it can perform.
Like the maximum strength it could perform.
But I just thought that there would probably be a big difference based on like a genetic factor. I reckon that plays a part.
For sure. So the next part he goes on to is how to increase strength. So practice. The level of the intensity you should be training at should be between 70 to 90% of your 1 rep max, which is the maximum weight you can move for 1 repetition. And this will allow you to improve your technique and skill lifting heavy weights. I would even assume if you're sort of beginning out, you probably should stick around that 70% just to make sure you've got your form correctly, as you were saying before. He's then here got work capacity, which is just another way of saying ability to tolerate high volumes of repetition, or being able to work out more frequently, I guess is another way of saying it as well, and recover quickly. Then he's got a bit here about avoiding injury. So, the lighter you go, the lower the risk of injury, which is pretty true, I assume, with, if you're going to start off with your 1 rep max without warming up, for example, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah. Exactly.
Then he's got a note here on the muscle mass. So muscle mass can be seen as your potential for strength. Gaining muscle mass may not immediately result in strength gains, but it increases your potential to get stronger. If you stay the same size, you have a cap on how strong you can get. Structural strength training, which focuses on building muscle mass and strength simultaneously, can be highly effective for increasing overall strength. By improving muscle mass and strength, you can break through plateaus and improve your overall physical performance. This can be achieved by utilizing bodybuilding-centric lifts for major muscle groups, which involves performing sets of 10 to 20 repetitions for 3 to 5 sets and training each muscle movement 2 to 3 times per week. Okay.
We kind of see that a lot though, like, how people go in the first 2 sets, they like lift really heavy and then, they drop the weight and do more reps, right? Because it's like that kind of dual, you're training both strength and kind of hypertrophy to tick both boxes.
Yeah.
So then on to the next bit. So how to make muscle? Well, there are 3 ways to build muscle, and these can be identified as mechanical tension. And mechanical tension is created when the muscle generates force to lift heavy things. It is the force generated by the muscle fibers to overcome the resistance. Mechanical tension and metabolic stress, so metabolic stress is the second way, compete in a kind of tug of war. More of one typically means less of another. So when you add weight to the bar, you generate more mechanical tension in the muscles, but this also means you can't do as many repetitions. So metabolic stress in the muscles is lower. So essentially, metabolic stress kind of comes about from doing a lighter weight but more repetitions, and mechanical tension is fewer reps but higher weight. And many bodybuilders kind of target both of these. If you want to try and hit mechanical tension, then like I said, lower reps, more sets, and kind of like a longer rest time. And the kind of intensity is around 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. Metabolic stress, so like we were saying, is the accumulation of metabolic byproducts such as lactate and hydrogen ions during exercise, which contributes to muscle fatigue and growth. It is created by maintaining constant tension on the muscles by reversing directions just short of lockout. So this is achieved by kind of hitting an intensity of like 60 to 70% of your 1 rep max. Sets 3 to 4, reps about 12 to 20 or to failure, and rest is usually a bit shorter, so around like a minute and a half, minute to 2 minutes. And then the last way is muscle damage. So muscle damage occurs when muscles are subjected to high levels of stress, such as during intense workouts that include slow negatives, so that eccentric movement that we're talking about. So the lowering part of a bicep curl, for example. such as during intense workouts that include slow negatives. Yeah, exactly what I said. The extended part of the range of motion. And these kind of 70 to 80% of your 1 rep max sets, 2 to 5. All the stuff is going to be on the book summary, so you can see all the details there.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning as well, all the pyramids are on there too. So we hope to be uploading, because it's a lot easier to say or to talk about these things when you can see them. And I can imagine for people listening, they might be a bit confused by these pyramids. But so the next section, we're moving on to high intensity training. So this focuses on reaching. So is this on building size as well, by the way?
Yeah, so this is about how to build size, I think.
How to build size rather than strength, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So high intensity training, this focuses on reaching maximum muscle stimulation through short, high intensity workout sessions rather than long workouts. High intensity training focuses on metabolic stress. So the drop sets, perform any exercise to failure or just short of failure, and then drop the weight and resistance and continue for more repetitions. I mean, I use these quite a lot, sort of near. I mean, you wouldn't start off a workout with these, but you would kind of finish off a muscle group with this.
Yeah, exactly.
And the magic, I guess, of these ones as well is you can kind of go on forever, depending obviously how high you start. But you can kind of choose to drop down by 2 segments, drop down by 3 segments. I mean, if there's another weight, you can, depending on how high you are, you can take off 5 kg each time. There's technically no level to how many times you can do this, to the point where you're just doing a bar for like 20 repetitions. But I mean, most people probably find they can't get that far. Then you got go big to grow big, mechanical tension. The most effective exercises for stimulating muscle growth are multi-joint movements like the squat, bench press, deadlift, chin up, and dip. Isolation exercises are more effective at targeting a muscle from various angles and providing stress at either the full stretch or the peak contraction of the movement. So isolation exercises can be anything from a fly machine to a pull down machine, leg extension, anything that involves machines rather than barbells tends to be more isolation based. But just make sure, once again, as well, before you try anything, you look up the correct form on the internet, because I've seen far too many people doing flies where they're like, looks like they're hugging somebody. It's not okay. Then we got the repetition weight scheme for muscle damage, using a moderately heavy weight, approximately 60 to 75% of your 1 rep max, and performing a lift until failure elicits the best results for muscle hypertrophy. So we can see here that building size is slightly different to the strength protocol, which was before. So this is more high stress in terms of high repetitions, isolating certain areas, as well as reducing the weight so you can actually pour out more reps as well. Then you got here time to grow, metabolic stress. So muscles that are subjected to long durations of tension exhibit a remarkable increase in protein synthesis, the crucial process that enables the repair and rejuvenation of muscles, ultimately leading to enhanced muscle growth. So this is that phrase, time under tension, and it's something we should all look to maximize. And it's interesting to think as well, because when you lock out a movement, you're not actually under tension anymore. So if you think you're, just by holding a bar straight up for like 20 seconds, you're getting any more muscle tension, you're usually not.
The tension's less so on your muscles and more so on your joints and your tendons. And that's why, like, a lot of the time they tell you not to lock out, or especially if you've got like you're lifting a heavy weight, because your tendons can't take as much weight as your muscles. And so that's why you see those horrible videos on like YouTube where someone's leg goes backwards or something. It's so bad.
Just thinking right now, I just want to throw up my mouth.
Oh, I saw one the other day, and it was like someone who wasn't even in a gym. They were like on a boxing like ring, They jumped off the ring and both their legs just went backwards. It's just horrible. God. Anyway, moving on. So diet for gaining muscle. So it takes roughly, like we said, 3,500 calories to burn or store 1 pound of fat, and 2,500 calories to synthesize 1 pound of muscle. Now, if we want to gain, this is all an example, if we want to gain 1 pound, which is 450 grams of pure muscle per month, We might also need to gain 1 pound of fat, creating a combined total of 2 pounds extra body weight. So to do this, we will need to increase our calories by 6,000 per month. That's 3,500 plus the 2,500. And over 30 days, this equates to an extra 200 calories per day. For 1 pound increase in muscle mass per month, target 2 pounds of weight gain and increase your daily calorie intake by 200. So very straightforward. And like, once again, it's normally a bit harder than that. I wish that was just the case, but, or maybe I've just been making a massive meal out of it. Pardon the pun, but, yeah. And then there's like, there is, this is actually what Good to Go talks about, but this idea of after training, like, is there a certain window that you should be like trying to hit after training? And so he says here, training merely provides the necessary stimulus to get bigger. It's what you eat afterwards that will determine if your muscles grow. And according to the future of sport nutrition, a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein.
Of course they do, because they're probably selling a protein shake that has those ratios.
Exactly. Basically, these like time frames don't really make a difference unless you are going to then work out really soon, right? So if I'm doing like some kind of exercise, and then I've got like an hour or two break, or I'm doing another bout of exercise later on, then maybe I do need to get a lot of carbohydrates in and protein to basically help me recover and also give me energy for the fitness that I'm going to be engaging in later on in the day. But if I'm not going to be doing anything until the next day, normally it doesn't really matter. You could just eat whenever and it will restore all of your kind of like stores, like your carb and protein stores. Yeah, that's why I was like, it's funny, like reading this book and then looking at the kind of scientific literature on
it's kind of why I was telling you we should read it sooner rather than later, before we say all this stuff and then realize it's a pinch of salt.
Backtrack.
So the how to increase speed and power is the next section, and I believe, looking at this, he's got another pyramid.
He does indeed.
He does. Or is it the same pyramid again? It looks like the same pyramid. Oh, sorry, I'm being so dumb here. It's the next pyramid, isn't it? It's the next step on the pyramid. So we've gone from mastering the lifts, improving the work capacity, gaining muscle size, and now we've got the increased speed and power. So rate of force development. To enhance your power output, it's essential to have an understanding of the rate of force development, ROFD. So ROFD refers to the body's capacity to generate the highest amount of force in the briefest period possible. In simpler terms, the faster your ROFD, the more explosive and rapid your movements become. So how do we improve this? Shock training. The depth jump is a training method developed by Dr. Yuri. I'm not even going to bother trying to say that. To help improve speed quickly. Do you want to have a go at saying it?
Verkhoshansky?
Yeah, it sounded quite good when you said it.
Verkhoshansky.
So athletes jump off a box, absorb the shock, and then immediately jump as high as they can. This shock training increases vertical jump height in the short term. It works by positively affecting the stretch-shortening cycle of the muscles and tendons, which leads to improved force production and output. So Dr. Yuri's depth jump program led to a 15% increase in maximal strength for athletes, and it has since paved the way for plyometric training and sports science to improve muscular speed and power.
I think it's really interesting. Yeah. It's kind of what we were talking about the other day with, like, could you just like continuously increase the level, the height of which you jump off something, right? And we were like saying, yes, you would probably adapt if you did it incrementally, that kind of like progressive overload. But I just thought this idea of this stretch shortening mechanism or cycle is really interesting, because think about it, like if you jump off something, your Achilles is like taking on the force, and so are your joints and your tendons, and then you're jumping off it straight away. So it's shortening and then lengthening. And if you can improve that mechanism, then it will like help you with speed naturally. Because every time you're coming down onto it and then you're pushing off. And I never thought of that as like a mechanism that you can actually train and try to improve. I just thought that was quite interesting.
That's where plyometrics sort of comes in, isn't it? I haven't done it. But I used to work out with Clement. We used to do we used to incorporate some form of plyometrics where I was doing like you know, those seated things against the wall where you sit and like hold it like a squat sit. I don't even know how you pronounce it. And then afterwards, you do some plyometrics. You sit there for like 2 minutes, and then you spend, I don't know, you try to do 10 reps where you jump as high as possible into a box. I thought that was quite an interesting way of working out, because most people don't really do that type of. It's almost like frowned upon in the gym. I don't see many people doing explosive workouts, you know, or like stuff where
I think people don't like to do explosive workouts. I just feel like, you know, it's there's more variables in there, right? And like I feel like so a lot of people just try to avoid it, and so it's the very few that actually do it. And actually, most of the time, people who do it are normally like athletes of some kind, I would say. I met a guy the other day actually who I was like sharing a bench with, and he was saying that he does athletics, and because I saw him doing like sprints and plyometrics and stuff.
Okay.
So the strength shortening cycle. So ballistic training is a weightlifting technique where athletes lift, move, or project a resistance as quickly as possible, applying maximal force. Conventional weightlifting exercises like squats or bench presses naturally decelerate at the top of the movement to protect our joints, but ballistic training eliminates this deceleration. For example, a plyometric push-up involves throwing oneself into the air, achieving maximal acceleration and optimal power. So if you think about it, like, you know, when you're doing a bench, it's slow at the very top, whereas here you can push all the way through, and so you can start to work those kind of like areas that you don't normally when under like normal conventional exercises that kind of stop at the top.
Lock out.
Exactly. This training results in a fully firing nervous system and the activation of fast twitch muscle fibers. Research has shown that adding ballistic exercises to a heavy resistance training program can increase 1 repetition max bench press and enhance power.
Oh, hello. I'm going to be bringing this in then.
Exactly.
I'm going to start getting that just bars, I'm repping it and I'm throwing my shoulders out.
I know you're just like throwing the bar up like with fucking weights on.
I can't wait to add it to the repertoire.
Exactly. So many. So the next one is training muscle types. Do you want to?
Yeah. So there are 3 types of muscle fibers. I'm like I said, I think in the last couple of podcasts, so we're going to end up talking about these muscle fibers so many times.
Over these,
I mean, I'm looking at this. Is there anything that they're adding that's new? I mean, saying, I guess, obviously the stuff we already know. So like the slower stuff is slow twitch, the faster stuff is fast twitch. There's not really much here in my head. That's going to add. So how to build more speed. So resistance band training. And I think he's quite a big proponent of resistance band training.
He is,
one of the biggest. So the use of resistance bands in strength training offers progressive resistance, which means the more the band is stretched, the higher the resistance. This is different from free weights, where the resistance remains the same, obviously due to gravity. So the linear variable resistance provided by bands mimics the natural strength curve of most muscles, which changes over a range of motion. Kinetics is the study of the body's motion. The strength curve is a term used in kinetics. So using resistance bands for a short period of time can be beneficial when overcoming training plateaus. However, it is important to use them properly and not attach them to everything. Is he talking here about attaching to like the barbell as you do it? Is that
to many different like things. Think about, you could attach it to a squat, a row, like basically anything where, like, you know, there's more resistance towards the upper half of the motion or the movement, and so so you're training that as well, you know, because there's less resistance at the top.
Yeah, that's a good point. So range of motion, resistance bands have functional benefits as well. Unlike weights, they can provide resistance over different ranges of motion and do not rely on gravity. This is important for athletes because they can train specific movements with resistance over functional ranges of motion that mimic sport-specific activities. Free weights can only provide resistance in a vertical plane due to gravity, while resistance bands can provide resistance in a horizontal plane, which is useful for movements like swinging a racket or throwing a ball. That's quite interesting because obviously, I assume that's how most of these athletes who do that sort of movement train.
I like the idea of like a vertical and horizontal plane, and the idea that and I think
there's a lot of stuff like with like twisting your abs, you know, like they used to say like you can hold a resistance band and like twist across, you know. That's why cable is quite useful for flies, I guess, because it's essentially, well, it's not quite the same, but it's still doing like a it's not doing it's not changing the weight as you go across, right? Because obviously it's using gravity, but it's still a horizontal plane.
Absolutely. So you can also apply, resistance bands to improving your rate of force development, like we talked about. So by utilizing a kind of compensatory acceleration training. So this is a method of moving the weight as quickly as possible throughout the entire lift. If we take the simple equation of force equals mass times acceleration, then the more we accelerate, then the more force we produce. However, during exercises like squats, most people start slow at the bottom where the leverage is poor and then speed up at the top. This can cause the bar to be thrown up if the weight is light enough. Resistance bands can help as they provide the most force at the end of the lift, requiring the athlete to accelerate through the entire movement. This allows athletes to train movements under resistance over functional ranges of motion that mimic sport-specific activities. Which I just think is quite interesting. I really want to start to introduce more resistance bands.
For sure. I think it's quite good for calisthenics as well, because you can add extra resistance to certain movements you're doing with that.
Yeah, we use it quite a lot, actually. They're pretty handy. And they're just like, especially if you're trying to like just be able to hit a movement, you can compensate. Essentially, you can, use a really light one, but like, it just holds you in the right position slightly while you're still using your other muscles.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you might even have some resistance bands exercises in the book. I don't think we took the notes, but if people are interested in that, I think they can check it out. Buy the book.
Yes.
Do you want to go into Olympic weightlifting, or I
don't think there's much.
People.
Essentially, it's power. You're applying a lot of power, and the same thing with this kind of rate of force development. You're like really pushing in a quick period of time, and so that can help you.
It's funny once again that the ways to improve power is by doing power-based exercises, right? It's just it's almost like common sense to a degree, right? Like if you want to improve your explosiveness, do explosive exercises.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all the kind of Olympic weightlifting aspect, which kind of means that we're on to the last bit.
Yeah. So how to improve endurance. One sec, I need to see the pyramid. He's got another pyramid. So there's no universally agreed consensus on the best way to train for endurance sports. But here is the endurance pyramid of priority. So at the bottom, you got the improved mechanics. This is very similar to all his other pyramids where, it's like, I think, what was the weightlifting one again? It was like improve the movements or something. I can't remember. It's just above. Anyway, so improve that first, then find your fuel, build consistency, add volume, and then increase intensity, which is really interesting because once again, he's almost like flipped these things on its head, because usually you would say something like, volume and intensity at the bottom, or the pyramid of, building up endurance. You need to do both of those. But obviously he starts where where, to be honest, if you really think about it, it probably is the mechanics, that needs to be like, once again, fixing your movement patterns, programming that first before you add weight or add volume to your running. Like he's kind of taken a massive, ever since that he met that guy in Russia with the whole, general fitness approach to weight training, etc. He's kind of like taken this under his stead, hasn't he? And every time now he always talks like the first thing you got to do is master the basics, which kind of makes sense.
Really does.
So looking at this, you don't have the most notes. You got the note here.
So I didn't find that much. I think basically he was just using this story of him going running with this tribe in, I'm going to butcher it, but I would assume, I think it was Africa. And he was just comparing his kind of like style or technique of running to theirs and why he was so inefficient. What I found interesting was just that like he has a quote here, like the Sand Bushman's footprints were smaller, shallower, swifter and shorter. And I thought that was an interesting concept, that you're not really like spending as much time on the ground and therefore it isn't as deep or as heavy. And so hence why like goes into the mechanics of running, which we've kind of talked about a lot, but haven't talked about on, we talked about it a bit in exercised, but so there are like 3 different variations of foot strikes. So there's a heel strike, where the heel strikes first, lands first, very self-explanatory. Then there's the mid-foot strike and the forefoot strike. and different strike patterns exert different forces on the body naturally. And humans have engaged in endurance running for millions of years, but the modern running shoe was not invented until the 70s. Once they arrived on our shelves, they came complete with elevated and cushioned heels, which in turn encourage heel striking. And I have a pair of these Vivo barefoot shoes, but essentially it kind of eliminates that and makes your muscles start to adapt more, rather than, if we have these cushioned soles that help with ankle support and take the force off the knee, then that's fine, absolutely. But the fact is that our muscles or our legs don't get used to that. So, and our muscles and legs that in our legs actually compensate, and so we end up having problems down the line. Yeah.
I think we'll get onto that subject as well. There was a book, I think, Power, Speed, Endurance, which you might be going onto at some point in this list, which goes into the goes more in detail on the biomechanics of this sort of running, because he kind of does the same thing, which is, before you try and improve in anything, sort out the mechanics first. So I believe he does that for not just running, but also cycling and swimming, maybe.
Yeah, I think it might be.
And then the last bit of notes you got here is the basics of bioenergetics. This is something I'd be interested in touching on, maybe another book on this as well. So the sort of different energy systems. So you've got the phosphocreatine system, the glycotic system, which operates without oxygen. So this is the anaerobic system, so to speak. Then you've got the oxidative system, which is requiring oxygen. So that's aerobic. And it's just quite interesting how your body, chooses to use which system depending on the, the type of exercise you're doing and the intensity, right? So, if you're doing really explosive work, it tends to be phosphocreatine, and it's the one that gets used up the quickest. Then you've got glycotic system, which is slightly, it's a bit delayed, but it comes on after about, I think you got here 10 to 30 seconds. And this is more, this is, I guess, after you've done your first explosive movement, it's probably your next level of anaerobic exercise. And then you've got this oxidative system, which takes about 3 minutes to kick in, and that's sort of your aerobic, so long distance running, etc. But it's quite, I think this is also why people are advised to take creatine, I believe, because creatine fills up your phosphocreatine stores. I believe that's the reason why.
Is that
so it's not like, because obviously it's kind of marketed as increase your gains, but the reason why it increases your gains, because it increases your ability to do explosive movements.
Okay, that makes sense.
You're it's a bit like, topping up your glycogen stores, you're topping up your phosphocreatine stores. Yeah. And because creatine you find in meats. Once again, it's another one of these things where I think most people probably have topped up creatine stores normally. But it's just you prey on people's anxiety that you're not optimizing, so people end up doing it.
Of course, especially anyone who wants to get that tiny bit better than someone else, if they're in
of course,
if they're a professional or whatnot.
So, I think that was it, wasn't it? That was the world's fittest book. There was a few meanders there, but I think is all relevant to the conversation. What are we doing next again? Can you remember what
I didn't? We could just do Good to Go, I think.
Okay,
let's do that.
We'll move straight into Good to Go, which is a book on recovery, tools and tips for recovery. It's a woman who's a scientist who basically goes through and tries out and uses all the different recovery tools that are marketed to professional athletes as well as the average Joe, as well as vitamins, minerals, protein supplements. It's really interesting. And it's definitely influenced a lot of how I think about this stuff now. And I'm hoping it will for anybody who's listening as well, because obviously we're talking about how to get in good shape, how to be more fit. And it's probably worthwhile knowing that, if you get into this space, you're going to be hit with a lot of marketing for, all these different tips and tricks that can aid and optimize your recovery and improve your, or speed up the time to your goals. And it's probably worth, getting a dose of realism or a dose of, perspective against, people who've got vested interest in selling you these solutions. So I'm excited to talk about that one next week. That'll be a long one, I can imagine, but definitely worthwhile.
No, same here. In terms of this book, if you want to find all the actionable ideas or the book summary, head on over to the website. It should be up probably by Friday. And then for next week, stay tuned for Good to Go. I'm excited.
Sweet. Well, that's a wrap.
Sweet. And that is a wrap. Hey guys, well there you have it. We hope you enjoyed that book summary. Now we know it can be a lot to take in all at once, so if you want to be able to read this in a more palatable size, or you want to be able to implement any of those key actionable ideas that we were talking about in this episode, head on over to our website at wisewords.blog, where the book summary will be waiting for you. Also, don't forget to check out our socials as we consistently upload the key ideas, benefits, and actionable ideas from all the books that we read. The links to those will be in the description below. Now, we want to be able to get you the best content in a way that's really easy to understand, but we need your help. Your opinion matters. So you are our feedback mechanism. And with those quick actions, whether that's leaving us a like or a dislike, commenting in the comment section below, or subscribing to our channel, all of those help us gauge what we're doing well and how to improve on our method of delivery. So if you have any thoughts on the matter, don't hesitate to act. It takes less than 10 seconds and it really helps us out. But with all that being said, until next time, stay wise.